When the Black Reapers decided to underestimate Elijah Thompson and his German Shepherd Ranger, they thought they were dealing with just another small-town kid and his pet. They couldn't have been more wrong. Behind the worn basketball shoes and innocent smile of the 13-year-old lay an unshakable bond with a military-grade protection dog, and in his grandfather's quiet study gathered dust a notebook that held secrets powerful enough to bring down an empire. Secrets that crime boss Vincent Romano would kill to keep buried. What began as a simple watch theft spiraled into an explosive confrontation that would expose decades of police corruption, reignite a vendetta 8 years in the making, and prove that the most dangerous force isn't the one that lurks in dark alleys, but the quiet protector who's been trained to guard, until guarding becomes a matter of survival. This is the story of how a boy and his loyal German Shepherd reminded a hardened criminal organization that true power lies not in causing fear, but in finding the courage to stand against it, one paw print at a time. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Pine Grove's maple-lined streets as 13-year-old Elijah Thompson made his way home from school. His worn basketball bounced rhythmically against the concrete, matching the steady patting of paws beside him. Ranger, his German Shepherd, kept perfect pace, dark eyes alert and vigilant despite the peaceful afternoon. "What do you think, boy?" Elijah caught the ball and spun it on his finger. "Should we show them our moves at the park today?" Ranger's ears perked up at the familiar word park, but he maintained his disciplined position at Elijah's side. His sleek black and tan coat gleamed in the afternoon light, a testament to the care his young master took of him. They passed Mrs. Chin's flower shop, where the elderly owner was arranging chrysanthemums in front of her store. "Elijah, how was school today?" she called out, waving a weathered hand. "Great, Mrs. Chun. Those flowers look beautiful." Elijah paused to help her move a heavy pot, something his grandfather had taught him to always do. Help others whenever you can. "Such a good boy," Mrs. Chin smiled, reaching into her apron pocket. "Here, take these cookies for you and your grandfather." And of course, she produced a dog treat, something special for Ranger. Ranger sat perfectly still, waiting for Elijah's permission before gently taking the treat from Mrs. Chin's hand. His impeccable manners never failed to impress the neighbors. "Thank you." Elijah tucked the cookies into his backpack, careful not to disturb the precious item within, his father's vintage Omega Speedmaster Professional. The watch was more than just a timepiece. It was a connection to the father he'd lost when he was just 5 years old. His grandfather had given it to him on his 13th birthday, along with a solemn warning about its value and significance. As they continued their walk home, Elijah's hand instinctively moved to his wrist, where the watch usually rested beneath his sleeve. He only removed it for basketball practice or games, always securing it safely in his backpack during those times. The weight of it against his skin was comforting, like a constant reminder of his father's presence. They passed the town's modest downtown area, where the local pawn shop stood like a gray smudge among the more cheerful storefronts. Old Joe's Pawns and Loans had always given Elijah an uneasy feeling, with its barred windows and the suspicious characters who sometimes lingered nearby. Today was no different. A group of rough-looking men huddled near the entrance, speaking in hushed tones. "Come on, Ranger," Elijah murmured, picking up his pace slightly. Ranger matched his stride, positioning himself between Elijah and the pawn shop without breaking step. At the park, the afternoon sun had drawn out the neighborhood kids. Tommy and Sarah Martinez were shooting hoops at the far basket, while their younger sister Elena played with her jump rope nearby. The familiar scene helped Elijah relax as he approached the court. "Hey, Elijah," Tommy called out. "One-on-one. You know it." Elijah grinned, but first turned to Ranger. "Stay," he commanded firmly, pointing to a shady spot near the court. Ranger immediately complied, settling into a watchful position. Before joining Tommy, Elijah carefully removed his watch, wrapping it in a soft gym towel before tucking it securely in his backpack. The motion caught the eye of Mr. Peterson, an elderly man who often watched the kids play while walking his tiny Yorkshire Terrier. "That's quite a timepiece you've got there, son," Mr. Peterson commented, adjusting his thick glasses. "Looks like one of those limited edition Omega models from the 60s. Must be worth a small fortune these days." Unbeknownst to Elijah, another pair of eyes had caught this exchange. Gabe Torres stood in the shadow of a nearby oak tree. His interest immediately piqued. He'd just left the pawn shop after selling a stolen laptop for a fraction of its worth, and his ears were trained to catch any mention of valuable items. Gabe watched as Elijah played basketball, noting how the boy moved with natural athleticism and confidence. But what really caught his attention was the careful way Elijah handled the watch, and how the dog never took its eyes off the backpack, even while appearing to doze in the shade. "Hey, kid's got some moves," Gabe casually remarked to Mr. Peterson, who had wandered closer with his terrier. "Oh yes, Elijah's quite the athlete," the old man replied proudly, as if speaking of his own grandson. "Comes from good stock. His father was the same way, God rest his soul. Left the boy that watch, you know. Custom engraving and everything. Probably the most valuable thing in town, aside from old Joe's entire inventory." He chuckled at his own joke. Gabe's pulse quickened. A custom engraved, limited edition Omega? That could be the score he'd been waiting for. After months of picking up scraps, selling stolen laptops and phones for pocket change, this could be his ticket to something bigger. As the basketball game wound down, Gabe observed Elijah's routine. The boy retrieved his backpack, checked the watch was secure, and called Ranger to his side. The dog's transformation from relaxed observer to alert guardian was impressive. "Guard," Elijah commanded as they prepared to leave. Ranger's posture shifted subtly, his movements becoming more measured and protective as they headed toward home. "Fetch." Elijah tossed his water bottle ahead, and Ranger darted forward, snatching it midair before returning it with perfect precision. "Good boy," Elijah praised, demonstrating the clear bond between them. Gabe followed at a distance, noting how they turned down Maple Street and entered a modest but well-maintained craftsman-style house. An older man, presumably Elijah's grandfather, was tending to a small vegetable garden in the front yard. "There's my basketball star." Samuel Thompson straightened up from his tomato plants, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "How was the game?" "Won by 3 points, Grandpa." Elijah bounded up the porch steps, Ranger close behind. "Mrs. Chun sent cookies." "That woman's going to spoil us all," Samuel chuckled, but his eyes carried a hint of concern as he scanned the street. He'd noticed more unfamiliar faces in town lately, and the growing stack of threatening letters in his desk drawer weighed heavily on his mind. Inside, as Elijah worked on his homework at the kitchen table, Samuel carefully opened the latest letter that had arrived that morning. "You can't protect him forever, Thompson. We haven't forgotten what you did. Time's running out." Samuel glanced at his grandson, peacefully working on his math problems while Ranger dozed at his feet. The boy had already lost so much. Samuel would do anything to protect him from losing more. "Elijah," he called out, trying to keep his voice casual. "There's been a string of break-ins around town lately. I want you to be extra careful, especially with your father's watch." "I know, Grandpa," Elijah nodded, his hand automatically moving to his wrist. "I always keep it safe, just like you taught me, and always keep Ranger close," Samuel added. "Remember, his training isn't just for show." Outside, hidden behind Mrs. Chin's carefully tended hedges, Gabe was already forming his plan. He'd spent the last hour watching the house, noting the security camera's blind spots, and studying the family's routine. The watch would be tricky to get to, the kid was careful with it, and that dog was clearly more than just a pet. But Gabe had pulled off harder jobs. He just needed to be patient, watch a little longer, learn the patterns. The kid would slip up eventually, they always did, and when that moment came, Gabe would be ready. As dusk settled over Pine Grove, Elijah and his grandfather sat down to dinner, sharing Mrs. Chin's cookies for dessert. Ranger maintained his vigilant post by the back door, occasionally lifting his head to check the windows. The peaceful scene betrayed no hint of the dangers gathering around them. A desperate thief plotting in the shadows, threatening letters concealed in a desk drawer, and old secrets threatening to surface. In the growing darkness, Gabe made his way back to his rented room above the local bar, his mind racing with possibilities. He needed to watch the kid for a few more days, learn his schedule, find the perfect moment. The watch could be his ticket out of this dead-end town, away from the petty crimes and small-time scores. Little did he know that underestimating a boy and his dog would prove to be the biggest mistake of his life. The next few days established a pattern. Gabe watched from various vantage points as Elijah went about his routine: school, basketball practice, walks with Ranger. He noted how the boy always checked his watch was secure, how Ranger's attention never wavered, how the grandfather seemed to scan the street before letting Elijah out of his sight. But most importantly, he noticed how Elijah always removed the watch before playing basketball, always tucking it carefully into his backpack. That would be his moment, Gabe decided. He just needed to wait for the perfect opportunity. When the kid was distracted, when the dog's guard was down, when the timing was just right. What Gabe failed to notice, however, was how Ranger's ears would prick up whenever he was nearby, how the dog's muscles would tense slightly, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. He didn't see the way Ranger's eyes tracked his movements, even when he thought he was well hidden. As the autumn days grew shorter and the shadows lengthened, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the quiet town of Pine Grove to its core. A boy's simple life was about to become extraordinarily complicated, and a thief's carefully laid plans were about to unleash consequences he could never have anticipated. The wind whispered through the maple trees, carrying with it the promise of change, as Elijah Thompson slept peacefully in his bed, his father's watch secure on his nightstand, and his faithful Ranger standing guard at the foot of his bed, ever vigilant, ever ready. The crisp morning air carried the scent of fallen leaves as Gabe leaned against the wall of Pine Grove Diner, watching Elijah and his grandfather through the window. They sat in their usual booth, the third one from the door, sharing breakfast before school. It had become part of Gabe's morning routine too, though they didn't know it. "Need any help today?" Gabe called out to Bill, the diner's owner, who was sweeping leaves from the entrance. Over the past week, he'd managed to pick up odd jobs around town, carefully crafting his image as a humble drifter down on his luck. "Could use a hand cleaning the gutters later," Bill replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Supposed to rain tomorrow." "I'm your man," Gabe smiled, adjusting his worn work jacket. He'd bought it at the thrift store specifically to look the part. "Just trying to earn honest money, you know?" Inside the diner, Elijah was finishing his pancakes while his grandfather reviewed the morning paper. Ranger lay under the table, his tail occasionally brushing against Elijah's legs. As Gabe passed by the window, Ranger's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. "What's wrong, boy?" Elijah reached down to pat Ranger's head. "You've been so tense lately." Samuel Thompson lowered his newspaper, glancing out the window. "Dogs have good instincts, Elijah. Never forget that." "But that's just Mr. Gabriel," Elijah said, watching the man help Bill with the leaves. "He's been helping everyone in town. Mrs. Chun says he fixed her leaky faucet yesterday." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd noticed the stranger hanging around town more frequently, but couldn't put his finger on what bothered him about the man. Just because someone appears helpful doesn't mean they have good intentions. "You're starting to sound paranoid, Grandpa," Elijah laughed, but he unconsciously touched his father's watch beneath his sleeve. Throughout the day, Gabe maintained his careful act. He helped Mr. Peterson with his grocery bags, fixed a loose shutter for the librarian, and even volunteered to help coach the younger kids at basketball practice. All the while, his eyes tracked Elijah's movements, noting how the boy's routine rarely varied. At the park after school, Gabe sat on a bench pretending to read a newspaper while actually watching Elijah play basketball with his friends. As always, the watch came off first, carefully wrapped and stored in the backpack. "Hey, mind if I join?" Gabe called out, approaching the court. He'd been waiting for the right moment to interact with Elijah directly. Ranger, who had been lying in his usual spot under the oak tree, immediately stood up, hackles raised. His warning growl was clear and threatening. "Sorry," Elijah apologized, holding Ranger back. "He's not usually like this with people." "No worries." Gabe backed away, hands raised in mock surrender. "Dogs either love me or hate me, no in between." "Maybe another time." Elijah nodded, but Ranger's reaction had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He'd never seen his dog react so strongly to someone before. Later that afternoon, Gabe made his way to Old Joe's pawn shop. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the musty smell of old furniture and forgotten treasures greeted him. "Back again." Joe Winters emerged from behind a shelf, his small eyes glinting with interest. "Found something worth my time?" "Not yet." Gabe leaned against the counter, lowering his voice. "But I'm working on something special. Ever seen a limited edition Omega Speedmaster Professional? Custom engraved?" Joe's eyebrows shot up. "That's serious merchandise. Where would a drifter like you get something like that?" "Let's just say it'll be available soon." Gabe smirked. "How much could you offer for something like that?" Joe scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Depends on the condition. But for the right piece, I might be willing to go as high as 50 grand. Cash, no questions asked." The number made Gabe's heart race. $50,000 would change everything. No more petty theft, no more odd jobs. He could finally leave this dead-end life behind. Days passed, and Gabe continued his careful observation. He learned that every Tuesday and Thursday, Elijah stayed later at the park for extra basketball practice. These were the days when he seemed most relaxed, most likely to let his guard down. The perfect opportunity came on a Thursday afternoon. Dark clouds gathered overhead, threatening rain, and most of the regular park visitors had already headed home. But Elijah was still there, practicing his three-pointers with Tommy and Sarah Martinez. Gabe watched from his usual bench as Elijah removed his watch and stored it in his backpack. The routine was so familiar now, he could predict every move. What was different today was the arrival of Elena Martinez, the youngest sibling, running toward the court with excitement. "Elijah, Tommy, Sarah," she called out, waving a phone in her hand. "Mom just had the baby. We're going to the hospital right now." The sudden news created exactly the kind of distraction Gabe had been waiting for. The Martinez siblings quickly gathered their things, and Elijah, caught up in the excitement, joined the celebration. In their rush, none of them noticed that Elijah's backpack had been left beneath the oak tree. Even Ranger seemed momentarily distracted by the commotion, his attention drawn to the excited children. It was now or never. Gabe moved swiftly but casually, as if he was just passing by. In one fluid motion, he scooped up the backpack and continued walking toward the alley behind the park. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to maintain an unhurried pace. He had managed about 20 steps when Ranger's head snapped around. The dog's reaction was instantaneous and fierce. A deep, threatening bark echoed across the park as Ranger launched himself from his position, covering the distance between them with incredible speed. "Hey, my backpack!" Elijah's shout followed Ranger's bark. Gabe broke into a run, no longer trying to maintain his cover. He could hear Ranger's powerful paws pounding the ground behind him, getting closer with each stride. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly before him, chain-link fences on either side, offering no escape. "Ranger, stop!" Elijah's command rang out just as Gabe spotted his salvation, a construction site at the end of the alley. Ranger skidded to a halt at his master's voice, but continued barking furiously as Gabe scrambled over the fence. Landing hard on the other side, Gabe didn't stop to catch his breath. He ran through the half-built structure, ducking under scaffolding and weaving between stacks of building materials until he was sure he had lost any pursuit. Finally, in the safety of an abandoned warehouse several blocks away, Gabe allowed himself to examine his prize. The watch was there, carefully wrapped in the gym towel, just as he'd seen Elijah do countless times. But as he dug through the backpack, something else caught his attention: a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with what appeared to be police notes written in a careful hand. Curious, Gabe began to read. Operation Clearwater. Lead Detective Samuel Thompson, key suspects. Vincent Romano, head of Distribution Network. Associates. Marco DeLuca, Anthony Rizzo. Evidence suggests connection to missing shipment. Possible corrupt officers involved. Warehouse locations. Gabe's eyes widened as he continued reading. This wasn't just any notebook. These were detailed notes about one of the biggest police operations in Pine Grove's history. He remembered hearing about it years ago, a massive drug bust that had brought down several crime families. And now he held evidence that had never been made public, written by the lead detective himself, Elijah's grandfather. The watch suddenly seemed less important as Gabe's mind raced with new possibilities. These names, these details. There were people who would pay far more than $50,000 for this information. People who had scores to settle with Samuel Thompson. Rain began to fall outside the warehouse as Gabe carefully tucked the notebook into his jacket. The threatening clouds that had gathered earlier now released their burden, as if nature itself was trying to wash away the day's events. Back at the park, Elijah stood in the growing darkness, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Ranger paced restlessly, whining softly, his earlier warnings now painfully justified. "I should have listened to you, boy," Elijah whispered, his hand absently touching his bare wrist where his father's watch usually sat. "I should have listened." The rain began to soak through his clothes, but Elijah barely noticed. How would he tell his grandfather? The watch had been his father's last gift, a precious connection to a man he barely remembered. And now it was gone. What Elijah couldn't know was that losing the watch would soon be the least of his worries. In that stolen backpack, hidden within his grandfather's old notebook, lay secrets that had been buried for years. Secrets that some people would kill to keep hidden, and others would kill to expose. As the storm intensified over Pine Grove, three very different figures contemplated their next moves. A boy determined to recover his precious inheritance. A thief realizing he'd stumbled onto something far bigger than a simple watch theft, and a retired detective who would soon discover that his past had finally caught up with him. Thunder rolled across the darkening sky, nature's own warning of the storm that was about to break over their quiet town. But this storm would bring more than just rain and lightning. It would bring danger, revelations, and a test of loyalty that would change their lives forever. In his hiding place, Gabe carefully wrapped the watch and notebook in plastic to protect them from the rain. He needed time to think, to plan his next move. The watch would bring him thousands, but the notebook could be worth much more to the right people. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. It belonged to a man who knew people who might be very interested in what Samuel Thompson had written in his private notes all those years ago. As Gabe's thumb hovering over the call button, another crack of thunder shook the warehouse. In that moment, he couldn't have known that this simple act of theft would set in motion events that would shake Pine Grove to its foundations, or that he had seriously underestimated both the boy he'd stolen from and the extraordinary dog who protected him. The rain continued to fall, washing away his footprints, but not his choices, as Pine Grove's quiet facade began to crack, revealing the darkness that had been lurking beneath its surface all along. The grandfather clock in the Thompson living room struck 9, its solemn chimes echoing through the silent house. Elijah sat on the couch, his shoulders hunched, while Ranger pressed against his leg, offering quiet comfort. The rain continued to drum against the windows, matching the somber mood within. "I'm so sorry, Grandpa." Elijah's voice cracked as he stared at his empty wrist. "I should have been more careful. Dad's watch. I let everyone down." Tears welled up in his eyes, but he fought them back, trying to be strong. Samuel Thompson paced the living room, his weathered face etched with concern. But it wasn't the missing watch that had him running his fingers through his silver hair. It was the notebook. That damn notebook he should have burned years ago. "Elijah, listen to me." Samuel knelt before his grandson, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "The watch can be replaced. Your father would care more about you being safe than any timepiece, no matter how precious." But it was the last thing I had from him, Elijah whispered, finally letting the tears fall. Ranger whined softly, laying his head on Elijah's lap. Samuel's heart ached. He knew he needed to tell Elijah the truth, or at least part of it. The stolen notebook had changed everything. Son, there's something I need to tell you about that backpack, about what else was in it. Before he could continue, Mrs. Chin's voice called from the front porch. Samuel? Elijah? Are you home? Samuel opened the door to find their elderly neighbor clutching her rain jacket around her shoulders. I just heard about what happened at the park, she said, her face lined with concern. I made some hot chocolate and brought over some of those cookies Elijah likes. Thank you, Rose. Samuel managed a weak smile, accepting the care package. Please, coming out of the rain. Mrs. Chin settled into an armchair, her kind eyes taking in Elijah's dejected posture. You know, when I first came to Pine Grove 30 years ago, your grandfather helped me through a very difficult time. He was a detective then, one of the best this town has ever known. Elijah looked up, curiosity momentarily displacing his grief. His grandfather rarely spoke about his police days. Samuel sighed, knowing it was time. That notebook that was in your backpack. It contained sensitive information about a case I worked on years ago. A very dangerous case. Across town, in his rented room above the rusty nail bar, Gabe sat at a rickety table, poring over the notebook's contents under a single bare bulb. The more he read, the more his hands trembled with excitement. Holy shit, he whispered, flipping through the pages. Names, dates, locations, it was all here. The infamous Clearwater raid that had rocked Pine Grove's criminal underworld 8 years ago. He remembered the headlines, the rumors that had circulated through the criminal grapevine. Vincent Romano's empire had crumbled overnight. The crime boss had managed to escape prosecution, but his organization had been decimated. And now, in his hands, Gabe held the key to what really happened that night. The bar's neon sign cast intermittent red light through his window as Gabe pulled out his burner phone. He had connections. Nothing major, but enough to get a message to Vincent. The crime boss had rebuilt some of his operation in the neighboring city, keeping a low profile but maintaining his influence. Back at the Thompson house, Samuel sat heavily in his chair, the weight of years settling on his shoulders. I led the Clearwater raid, he explained, while Mrs. Chin quietly served hot chocolate. We brought down one of the largest criminal operations in the state. But Vincent Romano, the man behind it all, he slipped through our fingers. The man who's been sending you letters? Elijah asked, surprising his grandfather. You knew about those? I saw one fall from your desk last week, Elijah admitted. I didn't read it, but I saw his name at the bottom. Samuel ran a hand over his face. Yes, Vincent has been trying to recover certain evidence that could still put him away, even after all these years. Evidence that was in that notebook. In the shadows outside the Thompson house, a dark figure listened intently, speaking quietly into a phone. Boss, you were right. The old man's talking about the notebook right now. Sounds like it's the real deal. Vincent Romano's voice crackled through the phone. Keep watching. I want to know everything that happens in that house. Meanwhile, Ranger had grown increasingly agitated, pacing between the front door and Elijah, his nose working overtime. Every few minutes, he would return to Elijah, nudging his hand insistently. What is it, boy? Elijah watched as Ranger went to the door again, letting out a low whine. Mrs. Chen observed the dog's behavior with interest. You know, in Chinese culture, we believe dogs have a special sense about people and things. They can follow threads we cannot see. Elijah stood up, something clicking in his mind. Ranger was tracking Gabe's scent in the park. He knew something was wrong with him from the beginning. Grandpa, Ranger could help us find him. Absolutely not, Samuel said firmly. This isn't a game, Elijah. Vincent Romano is dangerous. If he gets his hands on that notebook, but Ranger can do it, Elijah insisted, watching his dog's determined movements. Remember when he found my baseball cap after it blew away in the storm? He tracked it for 6 blocks. Elijah, please, Samuel began, but was interrupted by his phone ringing. The number was blocked. With a growing sense of dread, he answered. Detective Thompson. A smooth voice purred through the speaker. Or should I say, retired Detective Thompson? It's been a long time. Samuel's face went pale. Vincent. Outside the Rusty Nail, Gabe hurried through the rain-slicked streets, the notebook secured inside his jacket. The meeting had been set, midnight at the old railway warehouse. Vincent's associate had promised a substantial payment, more money than Gabe had ever seen. He was so focused on his destination that he didn't notice the dark shape moving parallel to him through the shadows. Ranger, having slipped out through the back door while everyone was distracted by the phone call, was silently tracking his scent through the wet streets. Behind the dog, trying to keep up while staying quiet, came Elijah. He had made his decision the moment he saw a ranger slip away. This was his chance to make things right. The old railway warehouse loomed at the edge of town, its rusty walls streaked with decades of neglect. Gabe approached cautiously, his heart pounding. A sleek black car was already parked in the shadow of the building. Two men emerged from the car, one tall and lean, the other built like a brick wall. The tall one opened the back door, and Vincent Romano stepped out into the weak light of a street lamp. Despite his 60 years, Vincent moved with the grace of a much younger man. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his expensive suit unmarred by the light rain. Only his eyes betrayed his true nature, cold and calculating, like a snake sizing up its prey. Mr. Gabriel Torres, Vincent smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Gabe swallowed hard, suddenly wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. The notebook. Yes, I have it, but we never discussed a price. Vincent's smile widened. Of course. I believe $50,000 would be fair compensation for your initiative. The amount made Gabe's head spin. It was the same figure old Joe had offered for the watch, but this felt different, more dangerous. The notebook first, the tall man said, holding out his hand. Hidden behind a stack of old railroad ties, Elijah watched the scene unfold. Ranger crouched beside him, muscles tense, but waiting for commands, just as he had been trained. That's him, Elijah whispered, recognizing Gabe. That's the man who took my backpack. His eyes moved to Vincent, and a chill ran down his spine. Something about the older man radiated danger. Gabe slowly pulled the notebook from his jacket. The leather was still damp from the rain, but the pages inside were intact. As he handed it over, Vincent's man quickly leafed through it, nodding to his boss. Everything appears to be in order, Vincent said, motioning to the other man, who produced a briefcase. Your payment, as promised. Gabe reached for the briefcase, but Vincent held up a hand. One more thing. The watch you mentioned, Thompson's boy's watch. Where is it? In my room, Gabe replied, confused by the question. Above the Rusty Nail. Why? Vincent nodded to his men. Go with them. They'll collect the watch, and then you'll get your money. Consider it insurance against any unfortunate revelations about our meeting. Elijah's heart raced. They were going to take his father's watch too. Without thinking, he whispered, Ranger, go. The German shepherd burst from their hiding place, barking fiercely. The sudden noise startled everyone, causing Vincent's men to reach for their weapons. It's just a dog, Vincent said sharply. Take care of it and let's finish this. But Ranger was no ordinary dog. As the first man approached, Ranger executed his protection training perfectly, keeping himself between the threats and the direction where he knew Elijah was hidden. Wait, Vincent's eyes narrowed. I know this dog. This is Thompson's dog. Boss, a voice called from the darkness. Another man emerged, out of breath. The kid, Thompson's grandson. He followed the dog here. Elijah knew his cover was blown. Standing up, trying to keep his voice from shaking, he called out, That notebook belongs to my grandfather. Vincent's face split into a predatory grin. Well, it seems our young friend has delivered us more than just a notebook. Bring him here. No, Gabe suddenly shouted, surprising everyone, including himself. That wasn't part of the deal. The kid's not involved. The deal has changed, Vincent said coldly. In fact, I'm beginning to think we don't need you at all, Mr. Torres. Ranger's barking increased in intensity as Vincent's men began to move. The sound echoed off the warehouse walls, carrying through the rain-soaked night. In the Thompson house, Samuel was pulling on his coat, his old service revolver secured in its holster. The sound of Ranger's distant barking had sent him into action, with Mrs. Chen already on the phone to the police. He's at the old railway warehouse, she reported. I can hear him from my second-floor window. Samuel, be careful. Back at the warehouse, Elijah stood his ground, though his heart was threatening to burst from his chest. Ranger moved to his side, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Your grandfather caused me a great deal of trouble, boy, Vincent said, his voice carrying easily through the rain. Cost me millions, sent my friends to prison, destroyed everything I built. And now, thanks to your carelessness and Mr. Torres's initiative, I can finally settle that debt. Gabe looked between Vincent and Elijah, the weight of what he had set in motion crushing down on him. The boy's face, filled with fear but also determination, reminded him of his own brother at that age. Before the streets had claimed him. The police are probably already on their way, Elijah said, trying to sound braver than he felt. Ranger's barking will have alerted the whole neighborhood. Vincent merely chuckled. Then we'll have to make this quick, won't we? The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night, but they still seemed far away. Too far away. Boss, the tall man warned. We need to move. Take the boy, Vincent ordered, and get rid of that dog. As Vincent's men moved forward, Ranger's training kicked in fully. The German Shepherd became a blur of focused aggression, years of protection training coming to bear in defense of his young master. Elijah knew what he had to do. Just as his grandfather had trained them, he called out the command that would change everything. Ranger, protect. The night erupted into chaos as lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in stark flashes of brilliant light. In that moment, as rain poured down and sirens wailed in the distance, the true test of loyalty and courage was about to begin. The aftermath of the warehouse confrontation left Pine Grove in a state of uneasy tension. The police had arrived just in time to prevent tragedy, but Vincent Romano and his men had managed to slip away into the night, taking the crucial notebook with them. In their haste to escape, they'd left behind a shaken Gabe and a determined Elijah, who had managed to avoid capture thanks to Ranger's protective instincts. Now, in a luxurious office across town, Vincent Romano sat behind a mahogany desk, examining Samuel Thompson's notebook under the warm glow of an antique lamp. The morning sun tried to pierce through heavily tinted windows, but like many things in Vincent's world, it was kept carefully at bay. Find Torres, Vincent commanded, not looking up from the notebook. Bring him here. He's become a loose end we need to secure. Marco DeLuca, Vincent's right-hand man, nodded silently and left the room. Within an hour, a nervous Gabe was escorted into the office, trying to hide his trembling hands in his jacket pockets. Mr. Torres. Vincent's voice was silk over steel. Your initiative in acquiring this notebook is appreciated. However, your handling of last night's situation leaves much to be desired. Gabe shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know the kid would follow me. Or that the dog. Silence. Vincent cut him off. Thanks to your incompetence, Thompson's grandson now knows we have the notebook. But perhaps we can use this to our advantage. He closed the notebook with deliberate slowness. You will stay hidden. Let them chase their tails looking for you, while we proceed with the real plan. The real plan? Gabe asked, his throat dry. Vincent's smile didn't reach his eyes. This notebook contains more than just evidence of my past operations. It contains proof of police corruption, of deals made and broken, of officers who took bribes. By the time I'm done, Samuel Thompson's reputation will be destroyed, and he'll wish prison was his only problem. Meanwhile, across town, Elijah and Ranger were already on the move. The morning dew had barely settled on the grass when they began their search, starting at the warehouse where they'd last seen Gabe. What do you think, boy? Elijah knelt beside Ranger, watching as the German shepherd's nose worked overtime. Can you find his trail? Ranger's training kicked in immediately. He began moving in a systematic pattern, nose to the ground, following invisible tracks that only he could detect. The dog's powerful sense of smell picked up traces of Gabe's scent, leading them away from the warehouse and toward the older part of town. As they walked, Elijah kept his eyes sharp for any signs of passage. His grandfather had taught him basic tracking skills during their camping trips, and now those lessons were proving invaluable. A discarded energy drink can, still wet from the morning dew, caught his attention. Look, Ranger. He picked up the can carefully. Cherry cola, the same kind Gabe was always drinking at the park. They followed the trail through back alleys and side streets, with Ranger occasionally stopping to reconfirm the scent. More clues appeared. A crumpled fast food wrapper from the diner where Gabe had worked, footprints in a patch of mud that matched the work boots he always wore. From his hidden vantage point in an abandoned building, Gabe watched Elijah and Ranger's progress with a mixture of annoyance and reluctant admiration. Persistent little brat, he muttered, taking another sip of his cherry cola. Doesn't know when to quit. He pulled out his phone, sending a quick text to Marco. Kid's getting closer. What should I do? The response was immediate. Keep moving. Leave false trails. Don't underestimate the dog. Gabe scoffed at the warning. How smart could a dog really be? He'd dealt with guard dogs before. A few well-placed treats usually did the trick. As Elijah and Ranger continued their search, they passed by the local coffee shop where retired Officer Frank Sullivan sat enjoying his morning routine. The old policeman recognized Elijah immediately. He'd worked with Samuel Thompson for 20 years before retiring. Well, if it isn't young Thompson, Frank called out, noting the determined look on Elijah's face. You seem to be on a mission. Elijah hesitated, then approached the table. He knew his grandfather trusted Frank, and right now, he needed all the help he could get. Officer Sullivan, Elijah began, but Frank waved off the formality. Just Frank now, son. Haven't worn the badge in years. He gestured to the empty chair. Sit. Tell me what's troubling you. As Elijah explained the situation, leaving out certain details about Vincent, Frank's weathered face grew increasingly concerned. He knew the real history behind the Clearwater raid, had been there as Samuel's backup when it all went down. Listen carefully, Elijah. Frank leaned forward, his voice low. Your grandfather made a lot of enemies during that raid. Dangerous enemies. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Very careful. But I need to get that notebook back, Elijah insisted. And my father's watch. Frank studied the boy's face, seeing the same determination he'd often seen in Samuel's eyes. Your dog. He nodded toward Ranger, who sat alertly beside them. He's not just a pet, is he? No, sir. Grandpa had him specially trained. Good. Dogs like that are worth 10 men in a tough situation. Frank glanced around before continuing. I can't help directly. Promised your grandfather I'd stay retired. But here's what I can tell you. In cases like this, the simplest solution is usually the right one. Don't overthink it. As they talked, Gabe was busy implementing his plan to throw them off his trail. He'd spent the morning laying false clues, dropped receipts, deliberately marked footprints, even a few pieces of trash that matched what he usually left behind. Try following these breadcrumbs, kid. He smirked, dropping another cherry cola can in an alley before doubling back through a different route. What Gabe didn't realize was that Ranger's training went far beyond simple scent tracking. The dog had been taught to identify authentic versus planted evidence, to recognize patterns that indicated deception, and to follow the freshest trail when multiple options presented themselves. As Elijah and Ranger approached the area where Gabe had laid his false trails, the German shepherd immediately showed signs of alertness. His behavior changed subtly, something only Elijah, who knew him so well, would notice. What is it, boy? Elijah watched as Ranger sniffed the planted evidence, but didn't follow it. Instead, the dog turned his attention to a different path, one that showed no obvious signs of passage. Back in his office, Vincent was growing increasingly agitated. The notebook had revealed more than he'd initially realized, including evidence of his own operatives who had turned informant during the raid. "This goes deeper than Thompson," he growled, flipping through the pages. "He knew about the moles in my organization before the raid. Someone talked." His eyes narrowed as he read a particular passage. "Someone who's still working for me." Marco shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, about the watch." "The watch is irrelevant." Vincent slammed the notebook down. "This information could destroy what's left of my operation." Thompson documented everything: names, dates, locations, even the overseas connections. "What about the boy?" Marco asked carefully. Vincent's expression turned calculating. "Perhaps it's time to send Thompson a stronger message. Something even his precious notebook can't fix." Meanwhile, Gabe had returned to his room above the rusty nail, the weight of Elijah's father's watch heavy in his pocket. He pulled it out, studying the intricate craftsmanship. The thought of selling it separately had crossed his mind multiple times, but he knew it would be too risky. The watch was too unique, too traceable. "Stupid kid," he muttered, thinking of Elijah's determined face. "Doesn't even realize what he's getting into." But something about the situation didn't sit right with him. Vincent's interest in the notebook made sense, but his questions about the watch seemed odd. Why would a crime boss care about a stolen timepiece, no matter how valuable? As these thoughts troubled Gabe, Elijah and Ranger were getting closer to his hideout. They had ignored the false trails and followed Ranger's instincts, which led them through a series of increasingly narrow alleys toward the rusty nail. "Good boy," Elijah whispered as Ranger's nose led them to the bar's back entrance. "You found him." But they weren't the only ones who had found Gabe. Vincent's men had also been watching, staying hidden in the shadows, reporting every movement back to their boss. "The kid and the dog just found Torres's hideout," one of them reported through his phone. "Take care of it," Vincent ordered. "But remember, I want them scared, not harmed." "Not yet." Elijah was about to approach the bar's entrance when Ranger suddenly stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Years of training kicked in as the dog positioned himself between Elijah and the approaching threat. Two of Vincent's men emerged from the shadows, their intentions clear in their stance and expression. Well, the larger one smiled unpleasantly. "Look who's playing detective." Elijah's heart raced, but he stood his ground. Ranger's presence gave him courage, and Frank's words came back to him. "Don't overthink it." In that moment, Elijah made a decision. He wasn't going to run anymore. The notebook contained his grandfather's secrets that had kept their town safe for years. The watch was his last connection to his father. Both were worth fighting for. "Ranger," he commanded, his voice steady despite his fear. "Guard." The German shepherd's posture shifted subtly, years of protection training evident in every muscle. Vincent's men hesitated, recognizing the stance of a professionally trained guard dog. Inside his room, Gabe heard the commotion beginning below. Looking out his window, he saw Elijah and Ranger facing off against Vincent's men. The sight stirred something in him, a memory of his own childhood, of his own lost chances at a different life. As thunder rumbled in the distance, promising another storm, Gabe made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and deleted Vincent's number. Whatever happened next, he couldn't let a kid pay the price for his mistakes. The tension in the alley reached a breaking point as rain began to fall, the drops creating a curtain between Elijah and his adversaries. Ranger's growl deepened, a clear warning to anyone who dared come closer. Above them, Gabe gathered his few possessions, including the watch. He had a choice to make, and for the first time in years, he was going to make the right one. The storm clouds gathered overhead, nature itself seeming to hold its breath as all the players in this dangerous game moved toward their final confrontation. Elijah stood firm, Ranger at his side, ready to face whatever came next. In his office, Vincent closed the notebook with a decisive snap. "Bring me Thompson," he ordered. "Both of them. It's time to end this game." The stage was set for a showdown that would shake Pine Grove to its foundations. As a boy, his dog, a thief seeking redemption, and a crime boss nursing an old grudge all moved toward a collision course that none of them could avoid. Thunder cracked overhead, and the rain began to fall in earnest, washing away the last traces of Gabe's false trails and leaving only the truth and its consequences to be revealed. The morning sun cast long shadows through the Thompson house as Elijah sat at the kitchen table, spreading out the clues he'd gathered. Ranger lay at his feet, ever vigilant, while Samuel Thompson studied his grandson's determined face. "I found his hideout at the Rusty Nail, Grandpa," Elijah explained, pointing to his hand-drawn map. "But Vincent's men were there too. If it wasn't for Ranger—" His voice trailed off as he remembered the confrontation. Samuel's weathered hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained steady. "You could have been hurt, Elijah. These men are dangerous. I know, but I'm not giving up." Elijah's eyes met his grandfather's. "Dad's watch, your notebook. They're both too important. And Ranger can protect me. He already has." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, studying the boy before him. He saw determination in those young eyes, the same determination he'd seen in his son's face years ago. Finally, he stood and walked to his study. "Wait here," he called over his shoulder. When he returned, he was carrying a yellowed, folded paper that crackled as he spread it on the table. "This is a map of Pine Grove from my early days on the force," he explained. "It shows everything. All the old warehouses, the forgotten alleys, the abandoned buildings where criminals used to hide." Elijah leaned forward eagerly as his grandfather pointed out various locations. "The town's changed some, but most of these places are still standing. The criminals of today aren't much different from the ones back then. They still use the same hiding spots." You're going to help me?" Elijah asked, surprised. Samuel nodded gravely. "You've shown me you'll do this with or without my help. At least this way, I can give you the tools to do it safely." He tapped the map. "But you have to promise to be smart about this. No unnecessary risks." "I promise, Grandpa. Ranger and I will be careful." Armed with the map and his grandfather's knowledge, Elijah set out with Ranger as their search entered a new phase. The German shepherd's nose worked overtime as they explored the locations marked on the old map, each one a potential hiding place for Gabe. Meanwhile, in a dingy motel room on the outskirts of town, Gabe paced nervously. His paranoia had grown with each passing hour, every sudden noise making him jump. The notebook lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard, while Elijah's father's watch seemed to burn a hole in his pocket. "They're closing in," he muttered to himself, peeking through the grimy curtains for the 100th time. Vincent's men, the kid, that damn dog. The walls of the small room seemed to be closing in around him. His burner phone buzzed, Vincent's number lighting up the screen. With trembling hands, Gabe answered. "Where's my notebook?" Vincent's voice was cold as ice. I need more time," Gabe stammered. "Just a few more hours to tie up some loose ends." "You've had enough time," Vincent snarled. "Bring it to me by midnight, or my men won't be so gentle next time they find you." The line went dead, leaving Gabe in panic-stricken silence. He couldn't stay here. The motel was too exposed. But where could he go? Back in town, Elijah and Ranger had reached an abandoned warehouse district. The old buildings loomed like sleeping giants, their broken windows staring blindly at the overgrown lots between them. "What do you think, boy?" Elijah whispered, consulting the map. His grandfather had marked this area with a star, noting it as a frequent hiding place for fugitives. Ranger's nose worked the air, and suddenly his ears perked up. He caught something. Before they could investigate further, voices echoed from around the corner. Elijah quickly pulled Ranger behind a rusted dumpster, holding his breath as two of Vincent's men walked past. "Boss wants that notebook tonight," one was saying. "Says if Torres doesn't deliver, we take care of him permanently." "What about the kid and the old man?" "Boss has special plans for them. Says it's time to settle an old score." Elijah's heart pounded as he listened, but Ranger remained perfectly still beside him, years of training evident in his disciplined pose. After the men passed, Elijah pulled out his phone to text his grandfather what he'd overheard, but stopped short. The watch, something his grandfather had told him about, had suddenly surfaced in his memory. The engraving, he whispered to Ranger. Remember when Grandpa showed it to me? Dad's initials are hidden inside the case, behind the movement. MT from Michael Thompson. If Gabe tries to sell it. Ranger's head suddenly snapped up, nose twitching. Without warning, he began leading Elijah away from the warehouse district, toward the woods that bordered the town. Deep in those woods stood an old hunting cabin, long abandoned by its original owners. Gabe had discovered it years ago, during one of his early jobs, and now it would serve as his final hiding place. Inside the musty cabin, Gabe pulled the notebook from his jacket and looked around frantically for a hiding spot. The floorboards were solid here, no loose panels to slip it under. Finally, his eyes settled on a hollow space behind a loose brick in the fireplace. Try finding it there, he muttered, securing the brick back in place. The watch he kept with him, something told him he might need it as a bargaining chip. Outside, Ranger led Elijah through the underbrush with confident steps. The German shepherd's training shone through as he navigated the complicated scent landscape of the forest, never losing the trail despite the numerous animal smells that might have distracted a lesser dog. As they approached the cabin, Elijah's foot came down on a fallen twig. The sharp crack seemed to echo through the trees like a gunshot. Inside the cabin, Gabe froze. "Who's there?" he called out, moving to the window. Elijah tried to duck behind a tree, but he was too late. Gabe's eyes locked onto him, and for a moment, both stood perfectly still, sizing each other up. Then Gabe burst through the cabin door, charging toward Elijah with surprising speed. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, kid?" Elijah turned and ran, remembering his grandfather's words about choosing his battles wisely. He could hear Gabe crashing through the underbrush behind him, but what neither of them saw was Ranger. The moment Gabe left the cabin to chase Elijah, the German shepherd slipped inside through the still open door. His nose immediately led him to the fireplace, to the loose brick that still carried Gabe's scent. With careful precision, Ranger used his teeth to pull the brick free. The notebook fell into view, and the dog gently picked it up in his mouth, trained to retrieve objects without damaging them. Meanwhile, Elijah led Gabe on a wild chase through the woods, ducking under branches and weaving between trees. Despite his larger size, Gabe was surprisingly agile, slowly gaining ground. "Stop running, kid," Gabe shouted. "I just want to talk." But Elijah knew better. He'd heard Vincent's men. Gabe was desperate, and desperate people couldn't be trusted. Just as Gabe's fingers were about to grab Elijah's jacket, a sharp bark cut through the air. Both turned to see Ranger standing proudly at the edge of a clearing, the notebook held carefully in his mouth. "No," Gabe whispered, his face draining of color. "No, no, no." Elijah couldn't help but smile, despite his breathlessness. "Good boy, Ranger." The German shepherd trotted over to Elijah, tail high, and deposited the notebook in his master's waiting hands. Throughout the entire retrieval, Ranger had been careful not to damage a single page, just as he'd been trained. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, kid," Gabe said, his voice shaking. "Vincent will kill me if he doesn't get that notebook." "Then help us," Elijah replied, surprised by his own words. "Help us stop him. My grandfather can protect you." Gabe laughed bitterly. "Protect me?" Like he protected all the other witnesses from the Clearwater raid. He pulled the watch from his pocket, holding it up. "You want this back? Then give me the notebook." But Elijah stood his ground, Ranger at his side. "The watch has my dad's initials engraved inside the case. MT, Michael Thompson. Try selling it, and every pawn shop in the state will know it's stolen." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Gabe's face. He looked at the watch, then at the notebook, then at Ranger's unwavering stance. Before he could respond, a phone rang. Not Elijah's or Gabe's, but a burner phone hidden in the notebook's cover. All three froze as Vincent's voice emerged from the speaker. "I know you're there, Thompson. You and your grandson both. Did you really think I wouldn't have a backup plan? My men are already on their way." Let's finish what we started 8 years ago. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the trees. Gabe's face went pale. They'll kill us all? Elijah looked at Ranger, then at Gabe, then back at the cabin. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. Follow me, he said to Gabe. I know every hidden trail in these woods. But first, give me my father's watch. Gabe hesitated for only a moment before tossing the watch to Elijah. As the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the trees, the unlikely trio disappeared into the deepening shadows of the forest, guided by a boy who knew the land, a dog trained for precisely these moments, and a map drawn by a man who had spent his life protecting their town from the very danger now pursuing them. Behind them, Vincent's men burst into the empty cabin, finding only a loose brick by the fireplace and footprints leading in multiple directions into the gathering dusk. The chase was far from over. In fact, it was about to enter its most dangerous phase yet. As they moved through the darkening woods, Elijah clutched both the notebook and his father's watch, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his young shoulders. But with Ranger's confident presence beside him and his grandfather's wisdom guiding him through the old map's secrets, he knew they stood a fighting chance. Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered once again over Pine Grove, nature itself setting the stage for the confrontation that was sure to come. In the growing darkness, a boy, his dog, and a thief seeking redemption made their way through the ancient trees, while behind them, the shadows of the past and present converged in a deadly pursuit that would test their courage, loyalty, and determination to their very limits. Vincent Romano's office was deadly quiet as he listened to his men's latest report. The morning sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds, creating prison bar patterns across his expensive desk. So, he said, his voice dangerously soft, "You're telling me that Torres has disappeared, and no one can find him?" Marco DeLuca shifted uncomfortably. "We've checked all his usual haunts, boss. The Rusty Nail, the warehouse district, even that cabin in the woods. Nothing." Vincent's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against his desk. "And the notebook? No sign of it either. But some of our guys think they saw the Thompson kid and his dog in the area." The crime boss's eyes narrowed. "Torres is either planning to double-cross us, or he's already done it." He reached for his phone. "Send everyone we have. Find him. Now." Across town, in the safety of the Thompson house, Elijah sat cross-legged on his bed with the recovered notebook open before him. Ranger lay beside him, head resting protectively near the precious document they'd retrieved together. "Look at this, boy," Elijah whispered, carefully turning the pages. His grandfather's neat handwriting filled each page with detailed notes, dates, and names. Operation Clearwater wasn't just about drugs. There were corrupt cops involved, money laundering through legitimate businesses. He paused on a page that mentioned the local pawn shop. Old Joe's Pawns and Loans, suspected front for Romano operation. Owner Joseph Winters complicit in laundering proceeds. The more Elijah read, the more he understood why Vincent was so desperate to get his hands on the notebook. It wasn't just evidence of past crimes. It was a blueprint of his entire criminal empire, including people who were still working for him today. Meanwhile, Gabe had returned to the cabin, his heart pounding as he approached the loose brick in the fireplace. One look confirmed his worst fears. The notebook was gone. "That kid," he snarled, kicking the brick across the room. "That stupid kid and his damn dog." His voice echoed through the empty cabin as reality sank in. Without the notebook, he was as good as dead. Fury and desperation drove him back toward town. He knew Elijah's routine, knew where to find him. The park would be his first stop. The kid couldn't resist playing basketball after school. Sure enough, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the basketball court, Elijah was there with his friends, the notebook safely hidden in his backpack. This time, though, he kept Ranger closer than ever. Gabe emerged from behind the bleachers, his appearance disheveled from hours of searching. "Hey kid, we need to talk." Ranger's reaction was immediate. The German shepherd placed himself between Elijah and Gabe, his warning growl causing nearby parents to look up in concern. "Give me the notebook," Gabe demanded, taking a step forward. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Elijah stood his ground, one hand resting on Ranger's back. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I read it, Gabe. All of it. About Vincent, about the corrupt cops, about old Joe's pawn shop." The mention of the pawn shop made Gabe's face pale slightly. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing around nervously. "Why?" Elijah challenged. "Afraid Vincent's men might hear? Or are you worried about what they'll do when they find out you lost the notebook?" Ranger's growl deepened as Gabe took another step forward, but the sight of the powerful dog's bared teeth made him reconsider. With a frustrated grunt, he backed away, disappearing behind the school building. What Elijah didn't notice was that Gabe hadn't really left. Instead, he circled around, staying just far enough away to avoid Ranger's keen nose while keeping Elijah in sight. The boys' next stop proved interesting: Old Joe's Pawns and Loans. Gabe watched from across the street as Elijah confidently walked into the shop, Ranger at his heels. Inside, Joe Winters looked up from his ledger, his usual greasy smile faltering at the sight of the German shepherd. "Can I help you, son?" "You can tell me about Vincent Romano," Elijah said firmly, pulling his father's watch from his pocket. "And about how you were going to fence this for Gabe." Joe's face went through several colors before settling on a sickly pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" Elijah opened the notebook to a specific page. "Because my grandfather's notes say different. They say you've been helping Vincent launder money for years." Before Joe could respond, the shop's door chimed. Two of Vincent's men walked in, their eyes locking first on Elijah, then on Gabe, who had followed him inside. Well, the larger one smiled unpleasantly. "Looks like we killed two birds with one stone." Ranger's growl filled the small shop as the men advanced. Joe quickly ducked behind his counter, wanting no part of what was about to happen. "The notebook," one of the men demanded. "Hand it over, and maybe we'll let you walk out of here." Gabe, seeing his chance, stepped forward. "The kid has it. I've been trying to get it back. I swear." The men turned their attention to Elijah, who clutched his backpack tighter. "Last chance, kid." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As the men reached for Elijah, Ranger launched into action, years of protection training coming to bear. The German shepherd's powerful jaws clamped onto one man's arm, while Elijah ducked under the other's grasp. In the chaos, Joe's true colors showed as he reached for a phone. "Boss? They're here. Both of them. And they have the notebook." Elijah ran from the shop, his heart pounding. He now knew three critical things. Vincent's men were closing in, the pawn shop owner was definitely involved, and time was running out. Back at the Thompson house, Samuel paced in his study, worry etched deep in his face. When Elijah burst through the door, out of breath and clutching the notebook, he knew the moment had come. "Sit down, son," he said gravely. "It's time you knew everything." As Elijah settled into the old leather chair, Ranger taking up his protective position by the door, Samuel pulled out an old case file. "Operation Clearwater wasn't just about drugs," he began. "It was about corruption at every level: police, politicians, business owners." Vincent Romano had spent decades building a network that reached into every corner of our town. He spread photographs across his desk, surveillance shots, evidence photos, mugshots of people Elijah recognized from around town. That notebook contains everything: names, dates, locations. But more importantly, it contains proof of who helped Vincent escape justice. People who are still in positions of power today. Is that why he's so desperate to get it? Elijah asked. "Yes, but there's more." Samuel's voice grew heavy. "Some of the corrupt officers we identified, they were my friends, people I trusted for years. When they realized I was onto them, they tried to warn Vincent about the raid. But one honest cop got word to me just in time." "What happened to that cop?" Elijah's voice was barely a whisper. Samuel's eyes grew distant. "He disappeared, like many others who try to stand up to Vincent. That's why I kept the notebook hidden all these years." It's not just evidence, it's an insurance policy. As long as Vincent knew I had it, he couldn't touch us. Meanwhile, Gabe had escaped into confusion at the pawn shop, but he knew he was running out of options. Vincent's men were everywhere. The kid had the notebook, and his chances of getting out of this alive were dwindling by the minute. In a desperate move, he pulled out his phone and made a call to one of Vincent's lieutenants. "I know how to get the notebook," he said quickly. "The kid trusts me now. I can get close to him." The response was immediate. "You have 1 hour. After that, you're as much a target as the boy." As the sun began to set over Pine Grove, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, all the players in this dangerous game moved toward their final positions. Vincent mobilized his men for a full assault. Samuel Thompson prepared to protect his family one last time. And Elijah, armed with the truth and with faithful Ranger by his side, knew that the real battle was just beginning. In his office, Vincent Romano studied an old photograph, one taken the day of the Clearwater raid. In it, a younger Samuel Thompson stood proudly with his police unit, unaware that within hours, everything would change. 8 years, Vincent muttered, crumpling the photo. 8 years of waiting, planning, rebuilding. And now a child and his dog threatened to undo everything. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Tell everyone, no more games. Whatever it takes, I want that notebook. And I want the Thompsons dealt with. Permanently." The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake Pine Grove to its foundations. As night fell, Gabe moved through the shadows, torn between self-preservation and an unfamiliar feeling of guilt. Elijah and Ranger prepared for whatever might come, their bond stronger than ever. And Samuel Thompson, retired detective and guardian of dangerous secrets, made preparations of his own. The quiet streets of Pine Grove held their breath, waiting for the storm that was about to break. In the Thompson house, Ranger's ears perked up at distant sounds, his training telling him that danger was approaching. Elijah clutched the notebook that had started it all, understanding finally the true weight of its contents. "Grandpa," he said softly, "what do we do now?" Samuel checked his old service revolver one last time before answering. "Now, we finish what started 8 years ago. But this time we do it together." Outside, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling down on a town that was about to become a battlefield. The time for running and hiding was over. The tables had turned, and now it was time to stand and fight. The evening shadows had just begun to lengthen when Gabe made his move. He'd been watching the Thompson house all day, noting how Elijah would occasionally step into the backyard with Ranger to let the dog stretch his legs. The kid had grown more cautious since their last encounter, but he still had routines that could be exploited. When Elijah came out for Ranger's evening break, Gabe was ready. He'd carefully scattered some of Ranger's favorite treats, the ones he'd seen Mrs. Chun give the dog, in a wide arc away from where he waited. It wasn't enough to distract the German Shepherd completely, but it would buy him the few seconds he needed. As Ranger investigated the treats, Gabe struck. He emerged from behind the garden shed, pressing a cold piece of metal against Elijah's back. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. "It's not real, but Vincent's men watching the house won't know that." Elijah froze, his mind racing. Before he could call out to Ranger, Gabe added, "Call him off, or Vincent's men will shoot him. You know they're watching." "Ranger, stay," Elijah commanded, his voice trembling slightly. The German Shepherd's head snapped up, a low growl building in his throat. "Good boy," Gabe said, slowly backing away with Elijah. "Now tell him to stay again. Make it convincing." "Stay, Ranger," Elijah repeated more firmly. "Guard the house." Ranger's training warred with his protective instincts. The command had been clear, but something was wrong. He watched, muscles tense, as Gabe led Elijah toward the back alley. What Gabe didn't realize was that Ranger's training was far more sophisticated than simple commands. The moment they disappeared from view, the German Shepherd began to move. Not in direct pursuit, but in a careful parallel path, using the shadows and his knowledge of the neighborhood to track them without being seen. "Where are we going?" Elijah asked as Gabe marched him through the darkening streets. "Somewhere we can make a deal," Gabe replied, constantly looking over his shoulder. "I need that notebook, kid. And the watch. They're my only chance of getting out of this alive." "Vincent will kill you anyway," Elijah said, remembering what his grandfather had told him about the crime boss. "That's what he does. He eliminates loose ends." Gabe's grip tightened slightly. "Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about." But Elijah could feel Gabe's hand trembling. "Think about it. Once you give him the notebook, what's stopping him from getting rid of you? You're a liability. You know too much." I said shut up. Gabe gave him a rough shake, but Elijah could hear the fear creeping into his voice. They arrived at an abandoned auto repair shop on the edge of town. Gabe led Elijah inside, where a single bulb cast harsh shadows among the rusted equipment. Outside, Ranger had taken up position behind a dumpster, watching and waiting. Gabe pulled out his phone. "Okay, Mr. Romano. I've got the kid. He knows where the notebook is. Send your men." Vincent's voice crackled through the speaker. "Very good, Mr. Torres. Perhaps you're not completely useless after all. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't do anything stupid." After hanging up, Gabe began to pace. The seeds of doubt Elijah had planted were clearly growing. "It's not too late," Elijah said quietly. "My grandfather can protect you. He did it for others during the Clearwater raid." "Yeah? Like he protected that cop who disappeared?" Gabe sneered, but his voice lacked conviction. "That cop didn't disappear," Elijah revealed. "He's living under a new name in Arizona. Grandpa helped him relocate. It's all in the notebook." This made Gabe pause. "You're lying. Check for yourself. The notebook's hidden in my jacket." Gabe approached cautiously, patting Elijah's jacket until he felt the notebook. As he reached for it, headlights swept across the building's dirty windows. "They're early," Gabe muttered, panic creeping into his voice. Vincent Romano entered like a king surveying his domain, flanked by 4 armed men. His expensive suit seemed out of place in the grimy garage, but his cold eyes belonged perfectly in the shadows. "Mr. Torres," Vincent smiled without warmth. "I see you finally managed to do something right." He turned to Elijah. "Young Mr. Thompson, your grandfather has been a thorn in my side for far too long." "The notebook," Gabe interrupted, pushing Elijah forward. "Kid's got it. Once you have it, I want my money and protection." Vincent's smile widened. "Of course. Marco, get the notebook." As the tall enforcer approached, Elijah's mind raced. He needed to buy time. "The notebook's worthless without the key," he blurted out. Everyone paused. "What key?" Vincent's eyes narrowed. "The watch," Elijah continued, thinking quickly. "The names in the notebook are in code. The decoder is hidden in my father's watch. That's why Grandpa was so desperate to keep them together." Vincent turned to Gabe. "The watch. Where is it?" "Right here." Gabe pulled it from his pocket. "But first my money." "Oh, I don't think so," Vincent said softly. "You've caused far too much trouble to simply walk away." He nodded to his men. "Search the boy. Find the notebook." That's when Ranger made his move. The German Shepherd had been creeping closer through the shadows of the garage, using the rusted cars and equipment as cover. Now, with perfect timing, he launched himself at Marco just as the man reached for Elijah. The garage erupted into chaos. Marco went down hard under Ranger's attack, his gun skittering across the floor. Vincent's other men reached for their weapons, but in the confined space, they risked hitting each other. Elijah seized his chance. He knew the layout of these old buildings from his grandfather's map. Ducking behind a tool chest, he sprinted for the back office. "Get him!" Vincent roared. 2 of Vincent's men pursued Elijah, while the others dealt with Ranger. The German Shepherd was a blur of focused aggression, using his training to maximum effect. He didn't try to actually bite the men, but his feints and growls kept them off balance, buying Elijah precious seconds. Gabe saw his opportunity in the chaos. While everyone was distracted, he could slip away with the watch. He edged toward the side door, Vincent's attention focused on Elijah's escape. But Vincent hadn't survived decades in the criminal underworld by being unobservant. "Going somewhere, Mr. Torres?" Gabe froze, the watch clutched in his hand. I was just betraying me. Again. Vincent's voice was deadly quiet. Marco, once you've dealt with that dog, show Mr. Torres what we do to traitors. Meanwhile, Elijah was racing through the maze-like back rooms of the garage. He could hear Vincent's men behind him, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. But Elijah had an advantage. He'd studied his grandfather's map thoroughly, memorizing the layout of every building in this area. He ducked through a doorway, then immediately doubled back through a connecting room. The sound of his footsteps echoed confusingly in the empty spaces, making it hard for his pursuers to pin down his location. Ranger, having successfully scattered Vincent's remaining men, followed his training and began tracking Elijah's scent through the building. The German Shepherd moved silently, years of practice allowing him to navigate the darkness without a sound. Back in the main garage, Gabe found himself surrounded. The watch suddenly felt very heavy in his pocket as Vincent approached. You know, Vincent said conversationally, I never expected much from you, Mr. Torres. A small-time thief, useful for minor tasks. But you surprised me. Not only did you find the notebook, but you managed to involve yourself in a vendetta 8 years in the making. I can still get it back, Gabe said desperately. The kid trusts me. Vincent's laugh was cold. The kid has outsmarted you at every turn. He and that remarkable dog have made you look like an amateur. No, Mr. Torres, your usefulness has come to an end. In the back of the building, Elijah had found what he was looking for, the garage's old inspection pit, a deep trench used to work under cars. More importantly, he'd found a control panel for the hydraulic lift. As Vincent's men approached his hiding place, Elijah waited. Years of playing basketball had taught him timing, and his grandfather had taught him strategy. Combined with Ranger's training, it was a powerful combination. The first man stepped onto the metal plate covering the pit. Elijah hit the switch, and the cover suddenly retracted. The man fell with a shout, not seriously hurt, but effectively trapped. The second man rushed forward to help his partner, exactly as Elijah had predicted. That's when Ranger struck from behind, knocking the man off balance. He toppled forward, landing on top of his colleague in the pit. Good boy, Elijah whispered as Ranger rejoined him. But their victory was short-lived. Vincent's voice echoed through the building. Enough games. Mr. Torres here seems to think the watch is valuable to you. Young Thompson, come out now, or I'll make sure you never see it again. Elijah felt torn. The watch was his last connection to his father. But the notebook contained evidence that could finally bring Vincent to justice. As if sensing his dilemma, Ranger pressed against his leg supportively. Then Elijah remembered something his grandfather had said. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game. He emerged from hiding, Ranger at his side, to face Vincent and his remaining men. Smart boy, Vincent smiled. The notebook, please. Let Gabe go first, Elijah demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. Vincent laughed. You're in no position to make demands. No. Elijah pulled out his phone. I've been recording everything since we arrived. Every threat, every admission. One click, and it uploads to my grandfather's email. It was a bluff. His phone had died hours ago, but in the dim light, no one could tell the screen was dark. Vincent's smile faltered slightly. Mr. Torres, he said, not taking his eyes off Elijah, it seems you've outlived your usefulness. Gabe, seeing his last chance slipping away, made a desperate grab for the notebook in Elijah's jacket. But Ranger was faster. The German Shepherd's training kicked in automatically, knocking Gabe back without actually biting him. The distraction was all Elijah needed. He threw the notebook high into the air, making everyone look up instinctively. In that split second, Ranger struck again, this time targeting Vincent himself. The crime boss stumbled backward, his carefully maintained composure finally breaking. Get them, he roared, but his men were already scrambling to help him up. Elijah snatched the notebook out of the air and ran, Ranger covering his retreat with a series of threatening barks that kept Vincent's men at bay. They burst out of the garage into the cool night air, the sounds of pursuit close behind. But Elijah wasn't running blindly. Every step was taking them exactly where he wanted to go, toward the old railroad cutting where he knew his grandfather would be waiting. The trap had been set long before Gabe had ever grabbed him in the backyard. Behind them, Gabe made one last attempt to escape in the confusion, but Vincent's men were ready. As Elijah and Ranger disappeared into the darkness, the last thing they heard was Gabe's desperate plea cut short. The confrontation wasn't over, far from it. But the first round had gone to a boy and his dog, proving that loyalty and quick thinking could triumph over desperation and greed. As they raced through the familiar streets of Pine Grove, Elijah clutched both the notebook and his father's watch, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. The night air carried the sound of approaching sirens, but whether they would arrive in time to prevent the final showdown remained to be seen. One thing was certain: nothing in Pine Grove would ever be the same after this night. The old railroad cutting loomed before Elijah like a dark canyon, its steep walls disappearing into the night shadows. His lungs burned from running, but he couldn't stop now. Vincent's footsteps echoed behind him, growing closer with each passing moment. "There's nowhere left to run, boy." Vincent's voice bounced off the cutting's walls. "Give me the notebook, and perhaps I'll let your grandfather live long enough to see morning." Elijah clutched the notebook tighter, his father's watch secure in his other pocket. Ranger stood beside him, muscles tense, ready for action. They'd reached the deepest part of the cutting, where the old track curved sharply around a blind corner. Vincent emerged from the shadows, his expensive suit now dusty and disheveled. Marco DeLuca and two other men flanked him, all with weapons drawn. "Your grandfather's stubbornness seems to run in the family," Vincent said, trying to sound calm despite his obvious anger. "But this little game ends now." "It's not a game," Elijah replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "It never was." Vincent took a step forward, but Ranger's warning growl made him pause. "Call off your dog, boy. Even he can't stop all of us." "Maybe not," Elijah admitted. "But he doesn't have to. I've read the notebook, Mr. Romano. Every page. I know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the dirty cops who are still on your payroll." This made Vincent's face darken. "You understand nothing." "I understand enough. Like how Detective Williams isn't really dead. He's in witness protection. Or how Judge Carlton takes bribes through his daughter's charity foundation. Or maybe we should talk about Commissioner Banks and his gambling debts." Each name made Vincent's face grow paler. These were secrets that could destroy everything he'd rebuilt since the Clearwater raid. "Marco," Vincent snapped. "Shut him up." Marco stepped forward, but Ranger was ready. The German Shepherd launched himself with military precision, years of protection training coming to bear in one explosive moment. His powerful jaws clamped around Marco's arm, not breaking skin, but applying enough pressure to make the man cry out and drop his weapon. The other men raised their guns, but the cutting's curved walls made the angles awkward. If they missed, the bullets could ricochet unpredictably. "Enough!" Vincent roared. "I won't let some kid and his mongrel destroy everything I've built." "It's already destroyed," Elijah said calmly, reaching into his pocket. "Because while you were chasing us, I was sending text messages. Everything in this notebook, all the evidence, all the names, has already been uploaded to secure servers. If anything happens to me or my grandfather, it all goes public." Vincent's composure finally cracked. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Check your phone. The story's probably hitting the news now." Vincent frantically pulled out his phone, and his face went ashen as he saw the breaking news alerts. But before he could react, a familiar voice rang out from behind him. "Drop your weapons." Samuel Thompson stood at the cutting's entrance, his old service revolver steady in his hands. "It's over, Vincent." "Samuel." Vincent turned slowly, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Come to die with your grandson?" "No," Samuel replied calmly. "Come to finish what we started 8 years ago." Suddenly, flashlights began appearing along the top of the cutting. Red and blue lights strobed against the night sky as police cars pulled up to both ends of the railroad track. Remember Frank Sullivan? Samuel asked. My old partner you thought was too scared to testify? He's been watching this whole time, coordinating with every honest cop left in the department. Vincent's men began to lower their weapons as reality set in. They were surrounded, outmaneuvered by a retired cop, a 13-year-old boy, and a German shepherd. But Vincent himself wasn't ready to surrender. With surprising speed for his age, he lunged toward Elijah, reaching for the notebook. Ranger reacted instantly, releasing Marco and intercepting Vincent mid-stride. The crime boss went down hard, the breath knocked from his lungs as the German shepherd pinned him to the ground. Good boy, Ranger, Elijah called out, his voice full of pride. Police officers began rappelling down the cutting's walls, while others approached from both ends of the track. Among them was Frank Sullivan, looking pleased despite his earlier claims of staying retired. Looks like you didn't need much help after all, Frank grinned, approaching Samuel. In the confusion, Gabe saw his chance. He'd been quietly working his way along the cutting's wall, hoping to slip away unnoticed. The watch was still in his pocket. Maybe he could still salvage something from this disaster. But he'd forgotten about Ranger's training. The German shepherd's keen senses had been tracking his movement the entire time. Without needing a command, Ranger left Vincent to the police and bounded after Gabe, cutting off his escape route. Going somewhere? Elijah asked as Ranger herded Gabe back toward the officers. Gabe's shoulders slumped in defeat. Here, he pulled out the watch. It's what started all this anyway. As the police led Vincent and his men away in handcuffs, the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky above Pine Grove. News of the arrest spread quickly through the small town, and people began gathering at the police station. Mrs. Chun was there with fresh cookies for the officers. Mr. Peterson stood with his Yorkshire Terrier, telling anyone who would listen how he'd known all along that something wasn't right about old Joe's pawn shop. Tommy and Sarah Martinez brought their younger sister Elena, who had made a thank you Ranger sign decorated with paw prints. Inside the station, Elijah sat with his grandfather, while Officer Jenny Burke carefully logged the watch into evidence. We'll need to keep this temporarily as evidence, she explained apologetically. But you should have it back within a few days. That's okay, Elijah smiled. I understand its real value now. It's not just about the watch itself. It's about what it represents. Family, loyalty, doing what's right even when it's hard. Samuel squeezed his grandson's shoulder proudly. Ranger, who had been given special permission to stay with them, laid his head on Elijah's lap. Speaking of doing what's right, Frank Sullivan approached with a newspaper in his hand. Look at this. The headline read, "Local boy and heroic dog bring down criminal empire." Below was a photo of Ranger standing proudly beside Elijah. The police department wants to present Ranger with a special commendation, Frank continued. First time it's ever been awarded to a dog. Ranger's tail wagged at the attention, but his eyes never left Elijah. His training had taught him to protect, but his heart had taught him loyalty. As the morning wore on, more townspeople arrived to show their support. Bill from the diner brought breakfast for everyone. The librarian arrived with old newspapers documenting the original Clearwater raid, now finally getting its proper conclusion. Even some of the honest cops who'd been afraid to stand up to Vincent years ago came forward, offering long overdue testimony about the corruption they'd witnessed. A week later, Elijah stood on the steps of Town Hall, his grandfather beside him and Ranger at his feet. Mayor Richardson presented them both with citations for bravery, and Ranger received his special commendation, complete with a shiny new badge for his collar. Pine Grove has always been a special community, the mayor announced to the gathered crowd. But it took the courage of a boy and the loyalty of his dog to remind us what that really means. They showed us that one person, no matter their age, can make a difference when they stand up for what's right. After the ceremony, Elijah knelt beside Ranger, straightening the new badge on his collar. The watch, now returned and secured firmly on his wrist, caught the sunlight. "What do you think, boy?" he asked softly. "Ready for our next adventure?" Ranger's bark echoed across the town square, causing everyone to laugh. The German Shepherd's training had prepared him for protecting Elijah, but no one could have trained him for the depth of loyalty and love he felt for his young master. Samuel watched them with pride, remembering the day he'd first brought Ranger home as a puppy. He'd known the dog's training would be important, but he'd never imagined just how crucial it would become. "You know," he said to Elijah as they walked home through the familiar streets of Pine Grove, "your father would be very proud of you." Elijah touched the watch on his wrist, feeling the hidden engraving he now knew was there. "I think he would be proud of all of us, Grandpa. We made things right." Behind them, the setting sun painted Pine Grove in shades of gold and purple. The town felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if Vincent's arrest had washed away years of hidden darkness. The notebook that had caused so much trouble now sat safely in a police evidence vault, its contents being used to root out the last traces of corruption in town. Old Joe's pawn shop had been closed down, its windows now covered with "for lease" signs promising a fresh start. Gabe, facing multiple charges but showing signs of genuine remorse, had begun cooperating with the authorities. His information would help ensure Vincent and his associates faced justice for all their crimes. As they reached their front porch, Mrs. Chun called out from her flower shop across the street, "Elijah, I made your favorite cookies and special treats for our hero Ranger." Ranger's tail wagged at the mention of treats, but he waited for Elijah's permission before accepting them. Some things like good training and better manners never changed. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Elijah reflected on everything that had happened. The watch on his wrist was more than just a connection to his father now. It was a reminder that courage comes in many forms, that loyalty is more valuable than any possession, and that sometimes the biggest heroes have 4 legs and a wet nose. "Ready for patrol, boy?" Elijah asked, standing up. Ranger jumped to his feet, alert and eager. Together, they set off down the sidewalk, ready to protect their town in their own special way. Samuel watched them go, knowing that Pine Grove's future was in good hands, and paused. The street lights flickered on one by one, illuminating their path as boy and dog walked their familiar route. But now they walked with the confidence of those who had faced their fears and emerged stronger. They had taken their stand together, and Pine Grove was better for it. And so, as darkness settled over the quiet town, Elijah Thompson and his faithful German Shepherd continued their patrol, ready for whatever adventure might come next. After all, with loyalty, courage, and a true friend by your side, anything is possible. The Pine Grove courthouse stood silent as Judge Margaret Wilson delivered her verdict. 3 months had passed since the night of the confrontation in the railroad cutting, and now justice was finally being served. Gabriel Torres, the judge's voice echoed through the packed courtroom. "For the crimes of theft, conspiracy, and involvement with a criminal organization, this court sentences you to 5 years in the state penitentiary." Elijah sat in the gallery between his grandfather and Frank Sullivan, with Ranger lying quietly at his feet. He watched as Gabe was led away in handcuffs, noticing how the thief's shoulders slumped in resignation. Just before reaching the door, Gabe paused and looked back. His eyes met Elijah's for a brief moment, and something passed between them. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the first seeds of understanding. "He'll have time to think about his choices," Samuel whispered to his grandson. "Sometimes it's all people need." Vincent Romano's trial had concluded the week before, resulting in a much heavier sentence. The notebook had proved invaluable, its detailed contents leading to the arrest of corrupt officials across 3 counties. Bank records were seized, offshore accounts frozen, and decades of criminal enterprise began to crumble. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to interview Elijah, but he handled the attention with remarkable humility. "I didn't do anything special," he told them, one hand resting on Ranger's head. "I just did what was right. The real heroes are Ranger, who protected me, and my grandfather, who never gave up fighting for justice." The reporters pressed closer, but Ranger's protective stance kept them at a respectful distance. The German Shepherd story had captured public imagination, leading to increased interest in professional dog training throughout the community. Mrs. Chun had already enrolled her new puppy in protection classes, and the Martinez family was saving up to do the same. The local kennel club had even started a youth program, inspired by the bond between Elijah and Ranger. "It's not just about protection," Elijah explained to a group of children at the program's opening ceremony. "It's about trust and partnership. Ranger isn't just my guard dog. He's my best friend." As if to demonstrate, Ranger performed some of his training exercises, showing how discipline and affection work together. The children watched in awe as the German Shepherd responded to silent hand signals and verbal commands with equal precision. Back at the Thompson house, Samuel sat in his study, looking through old case files with new eyes. The weight of unfinished business that had burdened him for 8 years had finally lifted. "Grandpa," Elijah knocked on the study door. "Mrs. Chin invited us for dinner. She says she's making your favorite dumplings." Samuel looked up, smiling at the sight of his grandson. The boy had grown in more ways than one over the past months. "Come here for a moment, Elijah. I have something to show you." From his desk drawer, Samuel pulled out a small box. Inside was his old police badge, polished to a bright shine. "I've been thinking about going back to work," he said. "Not as a detective. I'm too old for that now. But the department has offered me a position training new officers." "Really?" Elijah's eyes lit up. "That's perfect, Grandpa. They specifically want me to include a unit on working with police dogs," Samuel continued, watching as Ranger's ears perked up at the word dogs. "They think what happened here in Pine Grove could be a model for other small towns." The transformation of their community had been remarkable. Old Joe's pawn shop had been converted into a youth center, its walls now bright with murals painted by local artists. The warehouse district where Vincent had operated was being redeveloped into a public park, complete with a special dog training area. Later that week, Elijah visited the local jeweler who had been trusted to restore his father's watch. Mr. Goldstein, a craftsman who had known Michael Thompson, had treated the task as a personal mission. "Good as new," the elderly jeweler said proudly, presenting the watch in a velvet box. "Maybe even better. I polished the case, cleaned the movement, and made sure the hidden compartment where your father's initials are engraved works smoothly." Elijah carefully fastened the watch around his wrist, feeling its familiar weight. But now it represented more than just a connection to his father. It was a reminder of everything they'd overcome. Across town, in the state penitentiary's visitor center, Gabe sat alone at a table, staring at his reflection in the reinforced glass window. The past 3 months had given him plenty of time to think about how his choices had led him here. A guard approached with a letter, his first piece of mail since being incarcerated. The return address surprised him. It was from Samuel Thompson. Inside was a simple message. "When you're ready to make different choices, there will be people willing to help. The past doesn't have to define your future." Gabe read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and slipping it into his pocket. His expression remained neutral, but something had shifted behind his eyes. Back in Pine Grove, the annual town festival was in full swing, this year featuring a special ceremony to honor those who had helped bring down Vincent's organization. The mayor had insisted on it, despite Elijah's protest that such recognition wasn't necessary. "Sometimes a community needs to celebrate its heroes," Frank Sullivan had told him. "It reminds us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things." The ceremony was held in the town square, where just months ago Vincent's men had once lurked in the shadows. Now, families spread picnic blankets on the grass while children played freely, their parents no longer worrying about the hidden dangers that had plagued their town. Elijah stood on the makeshift stage, Ranger at his side, as the mayor presented them with a special commendation. But what touched him most was the sight of his neighbors. Mrs. Chun wiping proud tears from her eyes, the Martinez children waving enthusiastically, Mr. Peterson recording everything on his phone to preserve history. "Pine Grove has always been a special place," Elijah said when asked to speak. "But its real strength isn't in any one person or action. It's in how we come together as a community. It's in choosing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." After the ceremony, Elijah found himself drawn to the police station. The building that had once seemed so imposing now felt welcoming. Officer Jenny Burke, who had helped process the evidence from the case, waved him over to her desk. "Thinking about following in your grandfather's footsteps?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Maybe," Elijah admitted. "But first I want to learn more about working with police dogs. Ranger's shown me how important that partnership can be." Jenny nodded approvingly. "Well, you got a head start there. The training program your grandfather's developing is getting attention from departments across the state." As the sun began to set, Elijah and Ranger took their usual evening walk through town. But now their patrol route had taken on new meaning. Each familiar street corner held memories of their adventure. Some tense, some triumphant, all part of the story that had transformed their community. They passed Old Joe's former pawn shop, where younger kids now gathered to play basketball and do homework. The afternoon light caught the new sign above the door, Pine Grove Youth Center, where every kid can be a hero. Mrs. Chen called out from her flower shop, holding up a bag of treats. "Special delivery for my favorite four-legged hero." Ranger waited patiently for Elijah's permission before accepting the treats, his training as impeccable as ever. But there was an extra spring in his step these days, as if he knew how much his service had meant to the town. As they continued their walk, neighbors waved and called out greetings. Children asked to pet Ranger, who remained alert but gentle. The atmosphere of fear that had once gripped Pine Grove had been replaced by a sense of community pride and purpose. Near the park, they passed the construction site where the new K-9 training facility was being built. Samuel had helped design it, incorporating lessons learned from their experience. Soon it would be filled with handlers and dogs, all learning the same principles of loyalty, courage, and protection that Ranger embodied. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as Elijah and Ranger made their way home. From their porch, Samuel watched their approach, remembering the day he'd first brought Ranger home as a puppy. He couldn't have known then how crucial that decision would prove to be. "Good patrol?" he asked as they climbed the steps. "The best," Elijah replied, his father's watch gleaming on his wrist. "Pine Grove feels different now, doesn't it?" Samuel nodded, understanding exactly what his grandson meant. The town had always been their home, but now it was something more, a symbol of what could happen when ordinary people chose to stand up against injustice. Inside, spread across the kitchen table, were brochures for criminal justice programs and K-9 training courses. Elijah had been studying them carefully, planning for a future he now saw clearly before him. Ranger settled into his bed in the corner, ever vigilant even in rest. His legacy had already begun to spread, inspiring a new generation to understand the special bond between humans and dogs, and the power of that partnership to protect and serve. As night fell over Pine Grove, the streets grew quiet but not silent. There was activity and life. People walking without fear, children playing in their yards, neighbors chatting on porches. The shadow that Vincent Romano had cast over the town had been lifted, replaced by the warm glow of community and hope. Elijah stood at his bedroom window, Ranger beside him, watching their town settle into peaceful darkness. His father's watch ticked softly on his wrist, its restored mechanism as strong and true as the bond between a boy and his dog, and the commitment they shared to protect their home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight, in this moment, all was right in Pine Grove. The town had faced its darkness and emerged stronger, proving that even the smallest communities could stand tall against the biggest threats when they stood together. And at the heart of it all was an extraordinary partnership between a boy and his dog, reminding everyone that true heroes come in all sizes, and that loyalty and courage could change the world, one small town at a time. What quiet heroes walk among your community, waiting for their moment to make a difference? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their four-legged protectors. And remember, sometimes the bravest hearts have wet noses and wagging tails.